صاروا أذكياء أنه لما يشوش 5 دقائق يوقف.
Satellite interference is pure and simple censorship. It's
عملية التشويش بدأت قبل مجيء التلفزيون وقبل مجيء الساتلايت.
No frequency in itself can be secure as such.
تعرضت قنوات شبكة الجزيرة الفضائية
Today, a new moon is in the sky, a 23-inch metal sphere placed in orbit by a Russian rocket. Here, an artist's conception of how the feat was accomplished. A 3-stage...
1957. The Soviet Union succeeded to launch the first artificial satellite, called Sputnik 1. Its presence in orbit didn't exceed 3 months, but it was enough to start the space race as the USA launched a year later its first artificial satellite, Explorer 1.
Perfection has been done. The moment is at hand. The countdown reaches 0.
Since then, some 5,000 satellites have been launched. Today, nearly 1,000 satellites provide humanity with a daily flow of information in all fields of endeavor: economy, development, communications, science, and national security. Some people believe that our security as human beings hinges on these satellites remaining safe and orbiting around our planet.
Satellite is really the more secure of any of the parallel telecommunications technologies. Demand for satellite-based services around the world has been growing and continues to grow at a vast rate.
Today, life would be impossible without satellites. Their disappearance would mean the end of international calls and satellite television in the field of communications. In transportation, we would lose the Global Positioning System, GPS, and lose contact with those who work in the desert or remote areas. We would not be able to communicate with pilots, and airports would cancel all flights. Electricity would be cut off in large parts of the world. Computer networks would break down, and we wouldn't know tomorrow's weather forecast. Many of our daily activities depend on technology related to satellite, and its absence would make our world very different from what we're used to.
البث على الأقمار الصناعية بيتم ببث إشارة. تلك الإشارة إما أن تكون خالية من أي محتوى كإشارة فارغة، ثم بيتم وضع محتوى في هذه الإشارة اللي هو القناة التلفزيونية أو أيا كان المحتوى.
The Arabs reserved their first satellite in 1985, launching Arabsat-1, paving the way for Arab satellite transmission more than 25 years ago. Today, there are already more than 1,300 Arab satellite channels, up from 700 in the year 2010, just before the Arab Spring. Since then, many questions have been raised about the future of Arab satellite transmission, especially with the wider use of jamming by states as a means of precluding access to satellite transmission, not to mention other repressive means, such as the closure of satellite channels all the way to targeting journalists with persecution.
One can disagree with journalists and one can have arguments about the way that they're doing their work, whether it's ethical or not ethical and so on, and this is perfectly valid. But basically putting them on trial and basically making them part of a sort of a movement which is seeking to label journalism, valid independent journalism, as terrorism or aiding terrorists seems to me a really profoundly difficult and threatening development.
التشويش هو إحدى الوسائل الحديثة في هذا العمل، يعني بالإضافة لأنه قتل الصحفيين أو اعتقالهم أو منعهم أو إغلاق المحطات تؤدي إلى يعني الأمر يكون معروف جدا للمشاهدين. أما التشويش فأولا أغلب الناس ما تعرف أنه بيحصل تشويش باستثناء الفنيين والمحطة. ثانيا أنه التشويش لا تستطيع الإشارة إلى من الذي يقوم بذلك.
Some governments are refusing to acknowledge that the days of autocracy and controlled, centralized control of communities and people and speech and expression are over.
حينما تشعر الدولة أن مجرد خبر ينشر أو محطة تبث أنه يهدد أمن الدولة، يعني هذا يدل على ضعف هذه الدولة، وهذا يدل بوضوح على أن الحكومات تدرك أن بينها وبين شعوبها شق كبير.
Here is real pinpoint bombing.
Since the Second World War, as soon as the Allies invented radio signals, the Germans worked out a way to jam those signals. And from there on, it's become a kind of a war of technology. So everyone's trying to work out new ways to jam and then a way to get around that. And as the Cold War went on, so Russia was very tightly controlling all the information that was going on within its borders. And as a result, things like Radio Free Europe and BBC World Service were jammed pretty much constantly.
وفي نفس الوقت كانت أمريكا تشوش على المحطات التي تصدر أو تبث شيء معادي إلى ما يريده الغرب، وهذا حصل في كل الدول، في مختلف الدول في هذا المجال. خطابات جمال عبد الناصر خصوصا في فترة 67 وحتى 57 يعني كانت هناك حملة تشويش كبيرة جدا على البث، لأن ذاك الوقت البث كان يكون ضعيف أصلا. فعمليات التشويش الأردن مارسها، سوريا مارستها، بين حزبي البعث العراقي والسوري مورست هذه العمليات. مراحل العربية المختلفة، الخلافات العربية كلها تعرضت إلى هذا الجزء، ولكن في ذلك الوقت في تقديري كانت التكنولوجيا أضعف من أن يمكن استعمالها كما هو الأمر الآن.
The second largest Swiss city of Geneva hosts the International Telecommunication Union, ITU, headquarters, which is an agency of the United Nations and the second oldest international organization responsible for issues that concern information and communication technologies. Originally, the International Telegraph Union, ITU, was formed in 1865, but today it's responsible for coordinating the shared global use of the radio spectrum. It also takes in charge the connection of subscribers to the communication network, whether in international telephone systems, radio or television.
Our regulatory definition of harmful interference is any situation which seriously degrades or repeatedly interrupts radio communication service. The ITU has 193 member states, which are actually the representatives of the governments who have signed the treaty. The member states are the entities responsible for enforcing the legislation in their country on the use of radio communication, the use of spectrum. Article 45 of the ITU Constitution states that member states are responsible to prevent interference, harmful interference, and actually the details on how this is done is described in the radio regulations.
What we see when a signal is being jammed is that an unauthorized user, an unauthorized operator, is transmitting a different signal onto the same satellite on the same frequency, what's called the uplink frequency. And that gets combined with the desired broadcast signal, and the result is a signal that the receiver cannot decode.
التشويش نوعين، إما أن يكون تشويش متعمد، وفي حالة التشويش المتعمد بيكون إما لأسباب سياسية أو أسباب تجارية. في حالة التشويش الغير متعمد إما أن يكون بسبب الخطأ أو أنه ظهر في وقت غير الوقت المحدد له بالبث، أو لسبب تقني معين كعطل في المحطة الأرضية أو عدم القدرة على تشغيلها بالشكل الكامل لقلة التدريب.
The amount of interference, of harmful interference that is reported to us is very small. interference is actually unintended. It is a result of an error or mistake in pointing a dish or selecting the frequency.
It's important that the equipment on the ground, the Earth station equipment, is pointed exactly and accurately, precisely at the satellite that it is intended to be pointed at.
نسبة التشويش الغير متعمد موجود بكمية كلش هواية، أكثر الغير متعمد من المتعمد، بس إحنا كمشاهدين ما نحس بيها، لأنه هاي الأقمار لا غير مرئية، هاي الأقمار تنشاف وتستخدم للمحطات التلفزيونية الأخبارية من نقطة إلى نقطة اللي نسميها from point to point، مش للمشاهد.
Instances of interference of all types represent only a tiny, tiny, tiny fraction of the overall amount of traffic going around the world and up and down from Earth to space and space to Earth. But of course, what is at issue is that only one example of interference of any type is problematic and needs to be resolved.
Low-intensity jamming costs a lot of money and has a negative impact on viewers' interaction with the targeted channel. Jamming a particular channel, completely or partly, is similar to two people talking loudly and continuously at the same time to the extent that those present cannot comprehend what either of them is saying. So satellite operators and workers in the field seek a jamming-free world. In pursuit of that, efforts are put into scientific research in addition to various logistical, economic, and political endeavors, where training and development are central, especially on the peripheries of exhibitions and meetings that are organized around the world to combat unintended interference.
Beginning with our work in training, that was an immediate response to one of the causes of interference that is definitely unintended. It falls within the or under the umbrella of harmful interference, but it is unintended interference.
Unauthorized access could be accidental or deliberate. Accidental, we go back to the operator of an SNG track that mistake the time of the day of the week, the satellite, the polarization, the frequency, and uplink is carried on top of somebody else, most of the time without even being aware that it is doing that thing. Unauthorized access, a deliberate unauthorized access is somebody trying to steal bandwidth. We see that not often, but it happens that operators do not buy capacity from a satellite operator, just look at the spectrum analyzer where there is a small bandwidth available, they just transmit on that bandwidth, and if they have very short transmission, nobody will ever notice. So at least it's what they think. Nobody will ever notice.
When there is an interference, we provide an alternate capacity to the customer. Meanwhile, we are tackling and working with to mitigate the interference. We have enrolled 39 of our customers in GVF certifications on a certain duration at a peak time. And at the same time, another customer on the opposite polarization is transmitting without coordination with the operation center and causing a cross-pole. We could provide an alternate capacity immediately, but imagine the damage that will be done for the customer, because the damage coming from the interference, it could be financial, and in addition to the financial, the image, even though if we provide, as I mentioned, an alternate capacity.
We have heard a lot about what is doing with interference, and I can confirm what is happening with Arabsat is also happening with Eutelsat. This is always the same. There's some statistics from our interference, what terminals are really doing. So 80 to 85% is operator error. So this is more or less bad installation, cross-pole interference, and these kind of things we discussed already. 15% is equipment faults. And into this category fall bad antennas, running away local oscillators, and all of these kind of parts.
Training over the past decade helped develop the skills of satellite operators. This is, however, not enough to face deliberate interference. It was necessary to introduce a new technique to identify all transmission sources. This technique is called carrier ID, and it carries detailed information about each transmission process. According to experts, it's likely to reduce intended jamming.
During the London Olympics back in 2012, we had the first example of the introduction of a technology called carrier ID, which was a contribution to ensuring that uplinks from the ground to orbit were correctly pointed and were not causing any types of interference at all to adjacent satellites or to adjacent channels on the same satellite transponder.
تقنية الكارير اي دي تهدف إلى إعطاء هوية من خلال بث بيانات محددة عن المحطة الأرضية التي تستخدم القمر الصناعي، وبالتالي هي تفيد في عمليات التشويش الغير متعمد. أما في حالات التشويش المتعمد فهي غير مفيدة، لأن الجهة التي تقوم بالتشويش المتعمد لن تستخدمها على الإطلاق.
TV broadcasting satellites operate like a satellite mirror that reflects the signal and spreads it on Earth, but they also modify the signal before sending it again. There are two types of deliberate interference. The first one jams the entire station in all the areas it covers by jamming the uplink frequency. The second one jams the downlink frequency on a specific area. Al Jazeera has been victim to both of these kinds of deliberate interferences.
أي محطة تقدر تسوي تشويش، أي شركة عندها في أي نقطة ما بالوطن العربي يقدر عند الإحداثيات مال ترددات الأقمار الصناعية، ويقدر يبث الترددات بقوة واطية عالية ويأثر على حزمة القمر الصناعي.
عملية التشويش قد تستغرق ثواني وقد تستمر لعدة ساعات بشكل متقطع أو بشكل مستمر. بيستخدم فيها الجهة التي تقوم بالتشويش بتقنيات مختلفة وأساليب متعددة لتصعيب عملية تحديد موقع التشويش.
بالمناطق العربية لما الشخص اللي يشوش ما راح يسويها في محطة ما، ياخذ سيارة الاس ان جي في منطقة ريموت، يقول له خلال هاي الساعة سوي لي ابعث لي تردد على شوش لي العرب سات او شوش لي النايل سات في وقت معين ما، وخلص ويخلص دوره.
في معظم الأحيان بيتم التشويش على الإشارة الصاعدة بحيث تصل الإشارة إلى الأقمار الصناعية إما ضعيفة جدا أو بيتم إفسادها وإضعافها بشكل لا يمكن إعادة استخدامها أو الاستفادة منها عند نزولها من القمر الصناعي إلى الأرض. في بعض الحالات بيتم التشويش على الإشارة الهابطة، ولكن أثر التشويش على الإشارة الصاعدة أكبر، لأنه بيؤدي إلى عدم القدرة على استخدام الإشارة في منطقة تغطية القمر الصناعي، وهي منطقة عريضة كبيرة. في حالة التشويش على الإشارة الهابطة بيكون الأثر محدود في منطقة التشويش، فبيعتبر تشويش محلي أكثر ما أنه تشويش على منطقة كاملة.
Iran and Syria we're seeing about 90% of kind of in the last 30 years most of the jamming was happening there. Iran's quite an interesting one because when they originally started it just after the revolution, they weren't able to jam the satellites from where they were in Iran. So they took a satellite jammer and they put it on the roof of their embassy in Havana and started jamming from there. The Cubans eventually found out about it and they got kicked out. They then went to Bulgaria and I think the Czech Republic as well, and then eventually they were confined to Tehran, which is where they have to do it now. But the technology has now got so much more developed that they're able to jam pretty much any signal coming in.
that we are jammed from Syria, and we have evidences as well. We have been jammed from Iran. And the jamming from Syria was actually a catastrophe because they have been jamming us on Al Jazeera Media Network platforms, on Al Jazeera Sports platforms, and here they talk about the well-established size who is capable really to shoot or interfere simultaneously 8 to 10 transponders. I mean, this is not, I know it's a fragile, we can shoot it with a simple SNG, cost a few $100,000, available with many broadcasters and available with many news agencies or service provider agencies for production houses. But what we have been suffering is really beyond that. It's a professional intelligence type, if you want to say. So we have been, we have been suffering from people, from governments more than to be just simple entities.
في بعض الأحيان بيتم التشويش بدون محتوى، وفي بعض الأحيان بيتم التشويش بمحتوى بتكون في الإشارة بطاقة كبيرة بيساعد على تحديد موقع التشويش.
There has been a few cases of harmful interference repeatedly affecting some particular television programs on satellites. This is why you could think that these were intended, because it was these programs and not others.
3, 2, 1, arrow, 0. Bubble, strap, Q.
Boko Haram fighters in Nigeria pledge allegiance to ISIL after another series of bomb blasts kill dozens of people.
B-roll, cut, 4 next, 2, 10 outside.
BBC has experienced interference to its satellite distribution of some of its satellite television services over a number of years, and the intentional harmful interference that we have suffered can be characterised by the fact that it tends to follow whatever changes we make to try and mitigate the interference. So it follows the programme that's actually being jammed.
3, 2, 1, and the Q Sarmat.
In Hiwar, which is a very low budget channel, jamming has been extremely costly for us. We lost many of our original frequencies, and then we had to go and shop for new frequencies. We lost our viewers in certain parts of the world, especially in Morocco and North Africa, until people find you again, and some of the frequencies do not reach certain regions easily, and we had to compensate through streaming, internet streaming. It's a very costly thing. So if you have just a few million pounds as an annual budget for a channel, and then more than half of this budget had to be spent on satellites in order to guarantee that we reach our viewers. We are now on 5 frequencies, which is very costly. It's too costly.
في مايو 2009 احنا تفاجأنا بظاهرة جديدة لم نكن نعهدها قبل، وهي ظاهرة تشويش مباشر على القناة. كنا وقتها نبث ببرنامج استضفنا فيه معارض ليبي، فاتصلنا بالعميل على القمر الأتلانتيك بيرد، يعني وجدنا انه كل ما يطلع هذا البرنامج التشويش يحصل، عندما يتوقف البرنامج التشويش يقف. فالعميل يقول لنا تحديدا انه هذا البرنامج مستهدف، ويعني على الاغلب ان الحكومه الليبيه لا تريد ان يصل هذا الكلام او هذه الرساله للمشاهد الليبي.
تعرضت شبكة الجزيرة لأول حادثة تشويش في أحداث تغطية كأس العالم في جولاي 2010، حيث تم التشويش على قنوات الجزيرة الرياضية أثناء افتتاح البطولة. التشويش على قنوات شبكة الجزيرة الفضائية لا يتوقف، فهو مستمر بشكل دائم منذ انطلاق الثورات بالدول العربية.
ويتفاوت التشويش من بحسب طبيعة المحتوى وطبيعة الوضع في المناطق اللي بيتم تغطية الأخبار منها. ففي بعض الأحيان بيصل أن يكون بشكل يومي ولا ساعات طويلة جدا. في مرة من المرات تعرض البث إلى تشويش متعمد مستمر وصل إلى 17 ساعة في اليوم، مما يعد لفقدان بث شهر كامل.
These events are originating in areas which are areas of conflicts, wars or rebellions. Not very surprising that you have this type of event in this case.
Arabsat statistics show an increase in deliberate interference. Between 2011 and 2012, jamming increased from less than 10% to more than 25%. This, of course, affects the right of the Arab viewer to be informed. In 1948, the United Nations adopted the Human Rights Universal Declaration, which is an international declaration made up of 30 articles to protect human rights. Article 19 of the Declaration stipulates that everyone has the right to freedom of opinion and expression. This right includes freedom to hold opinions without interference, and to seek, receive, and impart information and ideas through any media and regardless of frontiers.
Signal interference is a violation of Article 19. Article 19 is very, very clear. It's that part of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights which guarantees people the right to freedom of expression and opinion. It means that everyone in society has the right to hold information, to impart that information, to receive information freely, without restriction.
I think what we need now is possibly to refine what Article 19 means in the modern world. So that was created in 1948 and the world has changed a lot since then. So we've now got satellites and we've got Twitter and YouTube. So it might be that we need to relook at the wording.
المشكلة التي لدينا هي ليس في النص وإنما في كيفية تطبيق النص، هذا من ناحية، ومن الناحية الثانية أن دائما الأشخاص الذين يقوم بها هم الأطراف المكلفين بتنفيذ النص، أي الحكومات. على الأفراد والتنظيمات ومنظمات العمل المدني والصحفيين والنواب أن يبدأوا بتوعية الناس أن ما يجري هو عمل غير صحيح وغير أخلاقي ويتعارض مع القانون ويتعارض مع الالتزامات الدولية ويتعارض حتى مع المواثيق التي وقعها هؤلاء المسؤولين، ويجب أن يتوقف ذلك. من لا يريد مشاهدة الجزيرة يمكنه أن ينتقل إلى محطة أخرى بدل أن تمنعني من رؤية الجزيرة.
This use of technical means to stop broadcasters and, through satellite jamming or whatever you want to call it is particularly dangerous. Not enough attention is being paid to it by the global administrators of communications technology around the world.
A number of big companies, the operators, own commercial satellites. These companies are responsible for monitoring the orbit, location, and function of the satellites that belong to them. However, these companies don't usually deal with satellite TV channels directly, but deal with the companies that act as service providers or terrestrial transmission stations, or what's known as media cities. These companies band together several satellite TV channels in what's known as a bundle or a group of bundles within a space allocated to them by the owner of the satellite. The service provider coordinates transmission to viewers in their homes. This is why the jamming directed at one particular channel may affect several other channels within the same bundle.
يعني وصلوا مراحل الناس صاروا أذكياء أنه لما يشوش 5 دقائق يوقف 10 دقائق، فصعب عليك حتى لو أنه يو بين بوينت المكان اللي موجود وين راح يطلع من عند التشويش، لأن الفترات متقطعة وقصيرة، لأن أنت تحتاج كمية كبيرة من الدقائق حتى تعرف وتتصل، والشركة الأقمار الصناعية تحاول تعمل كوردينيت بين أقمار الصناعيات حتى تستهدف النقطة بالضبط وين ما تكون، وعادة يستهدفوها وبعض مرات تصير. بس المشكلة بالوطن العربي ما في كنترول، الاس ان جيات مو كلها مسجلة، وثاني حتى لو مسجلة انت يمكن احتمال يستخدمها لغرض ما للتشويش، وهذا شيء كلش طبيعي، وورا ساعة يبث من عنده بث برنامج عادي وما تعرف انه هذا هو، هل هو هذا الجهاز اللي كان دا يشوش او كان غير جهاز، او هو هذا الشخص او غير الشخص. يعني اذا التردد تشوش في لحظة ما نقطة ما، ورا 24 ساعة احنا يتطلب من عندنا انه نعطي تردد ثاني. هذا التردد الثاني احتمال يكون بديل للتردد الاول، او احتمال يكون موجود موازي للتردد الثاني، بس هذا كله اعتماده على المحطة الموجودة، لانه يحتاج امكانيات مالية لتردد ثاني، مقابل انه انت لما تدفع هنا جنيه لازم تدفع جنيهين، واحنا بدنا نحكي على مبالغ كبيره بالاقمار الصناعيه.
So although we can broadcast a channel a number of times on different satellites, as we say, it's quite costly to do that, and the satellites themselves tend to deliver marginal benefit compared with the main platform.
اهلا بكم الى حصاد اليوم، معكم جمهورية.
إذا توقف استقبالك لبث قنوات شبكة الجزيرة وتواجه صعوبة في الحصول على الترددات
تغيير الترددات موضوع مزعج لشبكة الجزيرة وللمشاهدين. مزعج للمشاهدين بسبب تكرار أو كثرة هذه الترددات، مما يصعب عليهم عملية ضبط الترددات واستقبالها من فترة إلى أخرى. الموضوع مزعج بالنسبة لشبكة الجزيرة الفضائية، لأنه بتفقد نسبة عالية من المشاهدين من خلال استهداف ترددات معينة تاريخية قديمة لها نسبة مشاهدة عالية جدا.
One of the reasons why this is such an issue for the BBC is that, and for many broadcasters, is the fact that not only is one signal being interfered with, but the signals are actually grouped together. To date, the interference suffered by BBC Arabic has been as a result of what we call the collateral damage, where another service has been the target of the interference. We don't have any instances of BBC Arabic being directly targeted.
بالاقمار الصناعيه احنا نشتغل على ترانسبوندرات، والترانسبوندر هذا بعض المرات يحمل على 12 او 15 محطه، فاتشوشت محطه البقيه كلها تتاثر، وهذا يؤدي الى يعني عندنا عقود ويا الشركات تتاثر علينا بمساله انه الزبون يقول انه انا بدي احول اروح الى غير شركه او الى اروح الى غير فريكونسي.
The service providers and the broadcasters will look to see what content has been on air around the time that the interference started, and that often gives quite a good indication as to what the potential cause might be.
اذا صار عليك تشويش مره اوكي، مرتين اوكي، ثالث مره اتصل فيك اقول لك عندك كونتنت، عندك مشكله كونتنت، يا اما تضبط الكونتنت يا اما اني مجبور انزلك. يعني ترجع المسؤوليه الك، ما ترجع المسؤوليه الي، لانه اني لازم اتحمل مسؤوليه كل القنوات وكل الباقه الاقمار الصناعيه.
They will then often move what they believe to be the target channel and see whether the interference follows that.
ننزل كل المحطات، نصعد وحده 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 حد ما نعرف اي وحده هي المشوشه.
Governments try to control transmission equipment owned by broadcast companies and service providers by issuing special permits and tracking the equipment to ensure they're being used by authorized parties only. But that's not enough to fight against jamming.
هناك عدة تقنيات لمكافحة التشويش. من أحد التقنيات المستخدمة حالياً والتي يتم استخدامها على القمر الصناعي نيلسات هو القيام بالبث من مواقع جغرافية خارج المناطق التي يتم التشويش منها عادة.
The footprints that are used for uplinking a signal and for broadcasting it to the audience can be separated geographically. And that, for instance, would mean that if the service is being broadcast to the Middle East and somebody in the Middle East wanted to interfere with it, they would not be able to interfere with that service from inside the Middle East. They would have to go to a completely separate area. They might have to come into Europe or go into Asia or somewhere else like that to create interference. And that immediately changes the political dynamic of the situation. and therefore acts as a deterrent.
We have very good tools now, technical tools, to identify where interference is coming. This can be done by the satellite operators with an accuracy of a few kilometers or a few tens of kilometers, and on the basis of these estimates, then the administration responsible has to investigate the issue. Sometimes it takes a long time, sometimes not.
The accuracy of calculation depends on a number of factors and the size of the area that can be defined. We're generally talking an area that's defined in 10 or more kilometres diameter, but normally that is sufficient to identify a particular country.
The geolocation facility is part of a satellite monitoring facility. Actually, this represents quite an important investment. You need several earth stations, so it's an expensive tool. There are currently a dozen of countries in the world who have such facilities. What we are trying to do is to engage in MOUs with these countries so that we may use their facilities every time there is a situation like that which needs to be resolved.
في بعض الأحيان تكون العملية تقنية معقدة بيتم استخدام فيها شركات متخصصة عالمية في مجال كشف التشويش، منها شركة Integral Systems اللي قمنا باستخدامها أثناء كأس العالم، وأعدنا استخدامها مرة أخرى في صيف 2013 حيث قمنا باستخدامها لكشف مواقع التشويش التي تم إثبات وجودها من مناطق مختلفة في مصر.
Integral Systems, the company used by Al Jazeera to identify jamming sources, is based in Toulouse, southwest of France. Toulouse is the headquarters of the most important satellite manufacturing companies. Toulouse is also the headquarters of Airbus Industries. Integral Systems is an international specialized company for more than 25 years now. It provides technical solutions in equipment and programming systems for commercial and military satellite communication.
Geolocation is a tough technology because we're looking at small power signals coming from a satellite located at 36,000 kilometers from Earth. So finding this kind of problems can take some time. It's all a matter of being prepared. When we are prepared and we know that there is potentially an interference on a satellite, finding it is a matter of minutes. If we are not prepared, the time to prepare the system means we can take days. When you transmit to a satellite from your small antennas, you also transmit a very small signal on another satellite very close nearby. And we, with our software, we analyze the signal coming from the main satellite and the one with a small signal, and using triangulation techniques and also the fact that the satellites are moving, we are able to locate the satellite transmitter within a few kilometers.
Satellite operators and service providers constitute 8 unions around the world on the basis of geographical area. Arab States Broadcasting Union, ASBU, represents the Arab region. All these unions are affiliated to the International Telecommunication Union, ITU.
We have to convince ITU to develop something we call intentional interference registration, IIR, and that will help, and to trace, and we have to have a database for that.
المؤتمرات الدولية أو الإقليمية الخاصة بمواضيع التشويش هي مؤتمرات ضرورية، ولكنها غير كافية، والوصول فيها إلى قرارات توصف التشويش المتعمد ومن ثم تحدد آليات لإثبات التشويش ومن ثم
توصيف التشويش بأنها عملية أو تجريم عمليات التشويش ووضع العقوبات المختلفة هي عملية طويلة معقدة تتدخل فيها عوامل سياسية كثيرة ودول كثيرة، تتطلب في بادئ الأمر وصف التشويش المتعمد ومن ثم الاتفاق على آليات تجريمه وآليات معاقبته، وقبول الدول العضوة في الITU اتحاد الدول الاتصالات بتلك الاتفاقية أو الفريم وورك والتوقيع عليها.
ITU is a technical organization, so what we try to do is to avoid harmful interference to occur. Whether this interference is intended or not is more or less irrelevant in trying to find a solution. In addition, if you try to define what is intended interference, you realize that it's basically what you think the intention was, and this is very difficult to discuss. So this is why we do not have such thing as intended interference in the radio regulations. What is forbidden by the radio regulation is to send unnecessary signals, to send false signals, or signals without identifications.
Satellite law is immensely complicated, and what we've discovered is that the UN has certain articles of incorporation that the member states normally abide by. As I say, the ITU, which is part of the UN, also has articles that the member states sign up to, and that those respect the sovereignty of an individual nation. Between those two bodies, their respective articles are actually at odds with each other. So international law is not at all clear on the matter.
The International Telecommunications Union is supposedly, in theory, responsible for ensuring that all governments work on a level playing field when it comes to the administration of the rights of people to broadcast. But actually, it's a technical organisation. This is a political issue. The ITU doesn't have really any capacity to deal with it.
The ITU has no enforcement capabilities because the enforcement capability is in the governments. What we have is the power of persuasion. We bring the various parties together. We try to come to a solution, to persuade all the parties to accept a solution to the problem.
It could be awareness building that assists the ITU that when a given example of intended interference is brought to its attention to help in the process of what has been described as naming and shaming. In terms of how broadcasters, for example, could contribute to the overall campaign and effort to challenge and mitigate interference, consider the power that a broadcaster has in contributing to the naming and shaming process.
شبكة الجزيرة قامت في بعض المراحل من بدايات عام 2011 وحتى يومنا هذا بالإعلان عن مواقع التي تصدر منها عمليات التشويش المتعمدة.
ثبت لشبكة الجزيرة أن التشويش الذي تتعرض له قنوات الشبكة كان مصدره شرق العاصمة المصرية القاهرة وغربها من مناطق تضم في نطاقها منشآت ومباني عسكرية.
In light of the absence of a firm and clear legal system and an international body that is able to impose penalties on those who are involved in deliberate interference, disclosing precise data becomes one of the means of combating jamming. In parallel, there are technical as well as legal efforts aimed at ending the process of jamming.
Solutions that can prevent jamming are possible, but a lot of it comes down to the economics of the design of the satellite. And it's a decision for the satellite owner and operator as to what technology they install.
لن يكف المشوشون عن ابتكار أو إيجاد تقنيات أو البحث في طرق لعمل التشويش، ولكن ما نقوم به حاليا أو ما تقوم به منظومة الاتصالات هو عملية تصعيب التشويش، وفي حالة حدوث التشويش يمكن رصده ومن ثم تحديد الموقع ومن ثم القبض على أو الوصول إلى الجهة أو الأطراف الذين يقومون بالتشويش، وبالتالي العملية سوف تكون بالنسبة لهم أخطر
من السابق. في رأيي الدولة التي لا تستطيع أن تحدد موقع التشويش وضبطه وإيقافه في نفس الوقت موضوع غير وارد ولا يمكن تصديقه لأنه بيتعارض مع سيادتها.
In the midst of the confusion of politics and the media, jamming has become a political mine in the hands of circles that have complete disregard for commercial damage or international law. However, no matter how noisy deliberate jamming becomes, the voice of the media will never go silent.
So if a government doesn't like what Al Jazeera is doing or what the BBC is doing, they have to have a system where they go to the head of Al Jazeera or the head of the BBC or the head of CNN or the head of Associated Press or whoever it is and say, look, we think that this is unacceptable, you've got to do something about it. That then creates a mechanism for trying to deal with complaints, and that's part of the process of self-regulation, and it gives media an opportunity to say, okay, yes or no, we can discuss this and so on. We have to work out how do we create structures for dialogue with governments so that we have a way of sorting out our problems, but governments have to sort of move towards us as well. We have to see governments being willing to show that, as far as they're concerned, any form of censorship is a matter of last resort. It's not the first thing you do.